My name is Charles Klein, and until the 16th of October, April 20th, 2010, was the worst day of my life. April 20th is the day I came home early from a business trip and found my wife of 6 years, the mother of our 5-year-old daughter, in bed with that jerk Trent Miller. I'll tell you what happened on October 16th a little bit later. I can't say the discovery of her infidelity was a complete surprise. There were signs of Haley's unhappiness, both with me and with our lifestyle. The recent economic downturn had messed up our personal finances. We bought our home just before the crash, so we owed more on the mortgage than the current value of the house. Haley wanted to walk away from it all. I thought we could tough it out and eventually recover. The frustrating thing was, this was the house Haley insisted we just had to have, and we stretched ourselves to buy the big 4-bedroom house. Now, she's complaining because most of our income goes towards the mortgage. Ever since Christmas, when Haley was disappointed with her gift, she has been difficult to please. Nothing I say or do seemed to make her happy. My only joy in life came from Tina, our daughter. Tina's eyes would light up when I opened the front door after a day at work, which was a much warmer response compared to the look of disdain on Haley's face. I won't go into all the wrong reasons I married Haley Turner. It was a mistake from the beginning. She is a very beautiful woman, on the outside at least. Both of us were coming off failed relationships. Both of us were good-looking, loved intimacy, and knew how to please a partner. Both of us looked around, saw that all our respective friends were married, and wondered why we weren't. So, we ended up getting married for all the wrong reasons. The marriage may have started off on the wrong foot, but I grew to love Haley, and that love grew stronger after Tina was born. Many couples grow apart after having children, but it seemed like ours became stronger. It turned out either Haley was really good at pretending or she had some serious issues, maybe even both. Until last year, I thought we had a strong relationship and a great family. How foolish I was. I told Haley I would be coming home from my business trip on Thursday, but came home on Wednesday instead. Haley worked mornings and Tina was in school, leaving Haley free in the afternoons, so I took a chance. I drove up our street and saw a strange car parked in front of our house. This wasn't exactly a discreet move on Haley's part, but we weren't close with any of our neighbors, and most of the street was empty because of the housing crisis. I walked into the house, not bothering to be especially quiet since the noise coming from the master bedroom overshadowed any sound I could make. I stood and watched for a few seconds, long enough to snap a few photos with my phone. I didn't feel turned on, angry, or even particularly upset. Instead, I just felt an overwhelming sadness knowing that my marriage was over. There was no way for us to move past the infidelity and the complete loss of trust. The only question now was how difficult my life would become after the divorce. As bad as our financial situation was, it was only going to get worse. I would only be able to spend limited time with my daughter, and I would never have the chance to hold or get close to the woman I once loved. Haley was being close with the guy who I recognized as Trent Miller, a co-worker of hers whom I had met once before. He saw me, but before he could react, I pulled Haley off him by her hair. He quickly covered himself. Haley turned to look at me and did the unexpected. She screamed at me, "Get out of here, Charlie. What are you doing at home today?" I was stunned and reacted in the worst possible way. I pulled Haley's hair until her face was right up to mine and screamed back, "You shameful person. How dare you ask me why I'm home early?" I didn't notice Trent behind me. He grabbed his phone while this was going on and dialed 911. We were still yelling at each other when the police arrived. Trent met them at the front door, still wrapped in the sheet, and led them to the bedroom. Based on the fact that I pulled Haley's hair, nothing else, I was handcuffed and taken to jail. It took me a couple of days to come up with the money for bail. In that time, the little money left in our accounts was gone, and Haley had disappeared with Tina. I came home to an empty house. When I returned to work on Monday, a process server was waiting in the lobby. Haley had filed for divorce, citing mental and physical cruelty. I countersued, claiming adultery as a reason. It didn't do much good. The courts went through their usual process, granting custody to Haley and forcing me to pay alimony and child support. My credit score plummeted after we had to sell the house. While I still had my job, my life was in shambles. The only light in my life was Tina, otherwise I would have just left town. One silver lining was that all charges of spousal assault were dropped. Now, most of my evenings were spent sitting on a bar stool at Johnny's Tavern, listening to a bunch of loudmouths telling me how they would never let something like this happen to them. Some of them even claimed that I was less than a man for allowing someone to fool around with and steal my wife. After hearing a couple of drunks call me names as I left one night, I decided to start going to a different bar. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being disrespected. My coworkers, both men and women, either looked at me with pity or contempt. I began to consider some of the advice given by the drunks, my former friends at Johnny's. They were full of exaggerated stories about how they would get revenge and how I should seek justice against the couple that had ruined my life and made me feel like this. One Sunday, while I had Tina with me, we visited my parents. After dinner, Tina went to the den to watch TV while my mother and father sat with me at the table drinking coffee. I shocked my parents when I shared my feelings of powerlessness and how I felt the need to do something to regain my self-respect. Dad finally broke his silence. "Are you seeking revenge, Charlie?" "I don't know, Dad. It just feels like I should do something. Revenge is a dangerous thing, son. It might seem like it will fill the void, but it rarely does. It can also spiral out of control. You get your revenge on them, then maybe their friends or family have to retaliate. Just ask any gang member in a big city how well the whole eye for an eye thing works out." Although I normally respect my dad's approach to problem-solving, thinking first, then talking or acting, I just didn't want to play the role of a cuckold. "Charlie, I'll be very disappointed in you if you carry out some act of vengeance against them. I raised you to be better than that. Just let it go. Violence rarely solves anything." Despite my father's advice, everything came to a head on a Saturday night. I was leaving the bar when I saw Trent and Haley across the street, walking out of an expensive restaurant in the area. While they waited for the valet to bring their car, they engaged in a passionate hug. I walked to my old beat-up car and sat for a minute. I was cursing out loud while pounding the steering wheel with my fists. Eventually, I calmed down and turned the key. The car sputtered a bit before starting. I thought I had planned everything perfectly. I took my time and thought I had it all covered. Weeks later, I approached Trent at night, catching him completely off guard. Before he knew it, I was attacking him with a bat. I made sure to avoid his head. I didn't want to kill him, only to harm the man who had made me a cuckold. I swung the bat a second time, breaking his leg. The third swing took out his arm. Now on the ground, Trent was trying to protect himself while I attempted to hit him again. That's when someone shouted from a nearby house, "Stop." I already called the police. I immediately ran away, disposing of the bat, jacket, and mask in a dumpster a few blocks away. The next time I picked up Tina for my visitation, Haley came right out and asked if I was the one who attacked Trent. My plan was to make Haley wait and sweat for a long time before seeking my revenge. In response to her question, I just smirked without admitting anything or denying it. I wanted her to sweat it out. Of course, I was the prime suspect, and the police questioned me multiple times. I didn't have an alibi. I simply said that I had spent the evening alone in my apartment. There were no witnesses to verify or contradict my story, and the weapon was never found. The only thing tying me to the crime was motive, until one of the regulars at Johnny's got himself into trouble with the law. Trying to make a deal, he asked if the police had ever discovered who attacked Trent. The police and the district attorney made a deal with him, and the drunk claimed he knew it was me. He said I bragged about how I had hurt Trent with a bat. Of course, the drunk was lying, but it didn't seem to bother the police or the district attorney. I was charged with aggravated assault and attempted murder. Due to my financial situation, I was assigned a public defender. The district attorney built most of the case against me using circumstantial evidence and the false testimony of one drunk who cleaned up nicely for court, though. The jury found me innocent of attempted murder, but guilty of aggravated assault. The truth was, I did beat Trent up with that bat, so I couldn't complain too much. One thing did work in my favor. 3 months had passed between the attack and the sentencing. Trent's broken ribs, arm and leg had healed, and he didn't look much like a victim when he appeared in court. I think that's why the judge gave me a sentence on the lower end of the guidelines. Still, I was given 5 years in a medium security prison. So what happened on October 16th that made it worse than the day I caught my wife with Trent? It's the day I met my cellmate, Ronald Iron Ron Young, and ended up having to live among a lot of people I didn't like. I have never had any hidden desires to be with a man I was forced into a difficult situation. The physical evidence of my resistance is clear: missing teeth, a broken nose, and 2 black eyes. Ron, the leader of a group called the Aryans, left me with no choice. The ultimatum was clear: perform acts on him or face severe consequences. Luckily, Ron doesn't share, so I am protected from the other Aryans. It's a dangerous situation, but at least it keeps me safe from the non-Aryan gangs. It's a compromise I had to make. Ron, for some odd reason, believes it's unmanly to engage in certain acts. It's really disheartening to think about the kind of culture that allows this sort of punishment to happen. I may have committed a crime and understood the consequences of the court's decision, being imprisoned for at least 5 years, losing my freedom and everything that comes with it. However, why do we treat the inhumane assault of prisoners as a joke or even something to be celebrated? What happened to the concept of justice? I didn't hurt anyone, so why am I subjected to this abuse in order to survive? Gaining information while imprisoned is quite challenging. After 6 long months and numerous letters, I finally received a visit from my mother. My father was still not talking to me, and my mother did not come out of sympathy. She was there to vent her frustrations. Haley married Trent and they moved to Texas. They refused to let your father and me see Tina before they left, and they won't allow her to talk to us on the phone. My own grandchild, and I can't even see or speak to her. I tried talking to Haley's mother and begged her to understand. I tried to reason with her as one grandmother to another. Instead, she had the audacity to laugh at me. I can't understand such cruelty. Well, Mom, the truth is that I never cheated on Haley. She cheated on me. All the letters I sent to Tina were returned unopened. I'm working with one of the inmates here who knows law. Maybe a judge will force Haley to let me communicate with my daughter. My mother's attitude softened after that. She realized how much pain I was going through, and before she left, she started showing some love towards her only child. I didn't share the worst part of my time in prison, and fortunately she didn't ask. By the time she left, she promised to visit again. I won't go into the details of those 5 years. I didn't rehabilitate, learn new skills, or become a better person. Aside from one disastrous parole hearing, I learned to conceal my emotions and thoughts. During the first year as Ron's cellmate, I devoted every chance I got to working out in the gym. I channeled my anger towards Ron, Haley, and Trent into building my physical strength. Now, my 6'1" frame held a solid 210 pounds of muscle. When Ron found a new companion named Kevin Johansson 13 months after I arrived, I was finally left alone and had to fend for myself. The first time they came after me, there were 2 of them. I got severely beaten up, but those 2 ended up in the hospital. I, on the other hand, was sent to solitary confinement for a month. The worst part, my first parole hearing was scheduled during that time and couldn't be rescheduled. It took 2 more years before I had my meeting with the parole board. I answered their questions for 20 minutes before I lost my composure. I couldn't keep silent any longer. When some self-righteous person asked why I never apologized for the alleged abuse towards my ex-wife, I just unleashed all the anger I had deep inside me. I was married to Haley for 6 years, and I never laid a hand on her in anger. The only time I touched her forcefully was when I pulled her hair to stop her from performing certain acts on another man. She was engaging in those acts with him in our own bed. Before I came here, the only act of violence I committed was attacking her boyfriend in a foolish rage. And because of that one mistake, I was forced to do things I didn't want to just to survive. I've been in countless fights to prevent being assaulted. Your so-called justice system allowed her to falsely accuse me, take away our assets, and ensure that I couldn't afford a decent lawyer. Your justice system permits my ex-wife to deny me any contact with my daughter. And you have the audacity to ask why I haven't apologized for pulling her hair when I caught her being unfaithful in our bed. Your kind makes me sick. As you can imagine, I ended up serving the full 5 years. For 5 years, I heard nothing from my daughter, and my legal efforts to force Haley into allowing contact were fruitless. For 5 years, I fought for my survival. When I say I didn't acquire any new skills, it's not entirely true. I didn't learn any legitimate skills, but I did learn how to use the internet to deceive people and take their money. I found a job loading trucks at a local warehouse during the night. The pay was just above minimum wage, enough to keep me off the streets. During the day, I spent my time on my newly purchased computer, using money I saved while in prison. I created an online persona named Amy Carson. Amy was a widow on a mission to establish a humane sanctuary for unwanted animals. The website Save Our Furry Friends requested monetary contributions. With the tens of thousands of email addresses I had collected over the past 3 years, I had a mailing list of potential donors. It didn't cost me anything to send out the first requests. The response was promising some money trickled in. I sold the checks and credit card information to a criminal overseas. After 2 months, I had accumulated $21,000, more than enough for the first of my 2 goals after prison. Candy Sweet sat elegantly on the bar stool, looking like a vision. It had been over 6 years since I last had any physical contact with a woman. I wanted the full experience, so I put in extra effort. I had the certificate from the clinic, proving that I was in good health, firmly in my hand and $700 in my pocket. I even dressed up a bit, wearing slacks and a sport coat I bought from the Goodwill store. As I approached Candy, she turned and smiled at me. Her smile lit up the dimly lit bar. The picture of her on the escort website wasn't Photoshopped. She looked just as stunning in person as in her photo. She had long blonde hair, beautiful blue eyes, and a cute nose with perfect teeth. She wore a sleeveless blouse that revealed her beauty. She was also wearing a nice pair of slacks. You might wonder why she chose slacks instead of a skirt. Well, that's the reason I was able to spend an evening with such a gorgeous girl at a surprisingly low price of $600. The slacks were meant to hide the fact that Candy had a prosthetic leg. It seems some of her customers insisted on a discount when they saw her artificial limb. Personally, I was more interested in what she had to offer between her legs, and the prosthetic leg didn't make a difference to me. I was just happy to save a couple $100 to be with such a beautiful person. I ordered a shot of bourbon from the bartender and sat down next to Candy. She already had a drink in front of her, something in a martini glass. When I looked past her, I noticed a guy on her right side giving me a disapproving look. The last thing I needed was for this night to start off on the wrong foot. The gentleman next to me insisted on buying me this drink. I told him I was waiting for someone and that it wasn't necessary. Candy placed her hand on my arm as she spoke. I took it as a signal not to get upset. I silently counted to 5 and stayed calm. I pulled a $20 bill out of my wallet. "Excuse me, sir. I appreciate your buying my date a drink, but I'm certain a gentleman such as yourself will do me the courtesy of repaying your kindness." As I said this, I rose up from my bar stool. My right hand held the Andrew Jackson, but I held it so he could see the scars on the back of that hand, ugly scars from numerous prison fights. I wanted him to understand my words may convey meekness, but my posture was anything but meek. The man sized me up and thank goodness grinned. He took the 20. Can't blame a guy for trying with such a beautiful lady. Enjoy your date. With that, he got up from his bar stool and walked over to the other end of the bar. Candy looked at me. "Thank you for being a gentleman about that." He wasn't too pushy, and it would be a shame to end our evening negatively. "Where did you learn to handle situations like that so well?" It's too early to start on my life story, and I'm told it's best not to ask escorts personal questions. Let's talk about something else. I received a surprise when the bartender placed my drink in front of me. "It's on the house. I appreciate you handling that so well. We had a fight in here just last week when some drunk wouldn't leave another guy's date alone. It cost me quite a bit to fix the damages. I'll never see any reimbursement from the drunk who started it all, and my deductible is more than the damages." I raised my glass to the bartender owner and took a sip. He even poured me the good stuff. Candy and I finished our drinks, said our goodbyes to the bartender, nodded to the other guy, and walked out into the night air. I have a room next door. "Do you want anything to eat before we go?" "No, I'm good. Maybe we can order in some food later." "It's your treat. We can do whatever you want." I didn't have to be asked twice. I took Candy's arm and led her into the hotel. As we rode up the elevator, I couldn't wipe the stupid grin off my face. Candy looked at me. "What's with the grin? You're just so incredibly beautiful." We entered the room. I took off my coat. We had a really good time together. We woke up the next morning and got close one more time. "Want to shower?" We showered together and Candy caught me looking at her prosthetic leg. It was a motorcycle accident. What? My leg, everyone wants to know how it happened. You've been too polite to ask. Like I said last night, I was told not to get personal. Now that you brought it up, how did it happen? The guy I was dating, Randy, he bought a new bike, wanted to show it off, claimed he was a great rider and knew what he was doing. I was stupid and hopped on the back. He wanted to impress me, so he started showing off by going fast. He lost control, we crashed, and I lost my leg. What happened to Randy? Neither one of us were wearing a helmet, another dumb decision. He hit his head on a lamppost. He's in a coma, brain dead for a week before they turned off the machine, and he passed away. I should be more heartbroken. I know I sound cold, but he crashed and my leg is gone. He didn't even have insurance. All my medical bills and this prosthetic leg cost a fortune. That's why I ended up working in this industry. The worst part? When my mom and dad found out what I do for a living, they cut me out of their life. They didn't want me as a daughter anymore. There are worse things than being paid for getting close. Oh? Like what? Like my ex-wife. And I told Candy about Haley. When I finished, she agreed my ex was a bigger problem. When she said that, all I could do was laugh. Maybe the first time I ever laughed about the entire thing. Are you hungry? Can I buy you breakfast? Yes, that would be nice. Then I need to get to class. I'm not going to be doing this forever. You hear about guys falling in love with escorts, and when you come across a person like Candy, I can understand how it happens. But let's be real, she's an escort, and even if she wasn't, what did I have to offer a woman, anyone? The next day I was nervous for part 2 of my plans. I met Juwan Price at a downtown diner. Juwan was the outside contact for one of the black prison gangs. Juwan named the price, and I agreed with one stipulation: 2 names would be whispered in his ear when the knife slit his throat, mine and Johansson's. With that agreed, I gave Juwan $15,000. Juwan was one of the smart ones accused but never convicted. I hear what happens inside, can't blame you for wanting revenge. Nah, this isn't revenge, this is justice. Johansson was a decent kid. A little over a year after he became Young's friend, he died. The rumor going around the yard was Ron held the kid's head down too long and suffocated him. Johansson deserved better. Young spent 2 months in solitary. They got him for not reporting Johansson's death until the next morning. That's it. Well, whatever the reason, he's a dead man. Guaranteed. I don't have to tell you that no one ever gets wind of our deal, right? I understand. I didn't last 5 years inside by talking about things I shouldn't. Juwan just nodded and left. 4 days later, 4 inmates were killed in a prison riot that was caused by the stabbing death of Arian Ronald Iron Ron Young. A black inmate was suspected of the murder. He was one of those killed during the subsequent riot, and the prison spent 3 days in lockdown. The Amy Carson website had served its purpose. I shut it down before any law enforcement agencies took notice and started coming after me. Right now, it was all small potatoes. Too little money was involved for any agency to investigate. My interest was now set on finding Tina. Haley's Facebook page disappeared 2 years ago. Her last posting had their family in a Dallas suburb. Tina had just turned 9 and the happy family Haley. Trent and Tina posed in front of the Disney World gate. Then, nothing. Imagine my surprise when, just for fun, I Googled Trent Miller and discovered Trent living in Chicago again. Nothing came up for Haley, but at least I now had a lead. It cost $1,000 of my stolen funds for a PI to discover where Trent lived and worked, that he no longer lived with my ex, and where he liked to hang out after work. It took Trent a few minutes to realize who was sitting on the bar stool next to him, understandable since I looked different then when he last saw me. That was at my sentencing for beating him with a Louisville Slugger. My muscular body, the broken nose and the shaved head were probably a little intimidating. He turned toward me and asked, "Are we going to have trouble?" I had considered this question beforehand and had my answer ready. No, Trent. Beating you up with a baseball bat was a mistake last time. It cost me 5 years of freedom and many terrible experiences in prison. It also cost me the joy of watching my little girl grow up. I was actually here to ask if you know where Tina is. I'd tell you if I knew. Haley left me for another guy, and the 3 of them left for parts unknown. I was watching Trent's eyes as he answered. You learn to look at the eyes when you're in prison. The eyes really are windows to the soul. I decided Trent was telling me the truth. As if to reinforce my gut, Trent continued. I want you to know something, Charlie. I should never have gotten involved with Haley while she was still married to you. That was wrong. I really loved Haley, and I thought she really loved me. It hurt like hell when she replaced me with that guy. For the first time I realized how you felt. When we started having lunches, she told me a bunch of lies which I didn't understand until I moved back here and talked to some of the couples you two knew before. When I first met Haley, she told me you were abusive to her and Tina, said your marriage was a sham and it was only a matter of time before she was dead or divorced. I thought I was her knight in shining armor. Of course, when you beat me up, it only reinforced her lies. Trent took a drink of his beer and continued. I want you to know one more thing. I disagreed with Haley when she cut you and your folks from Tina's life. I thought it was a mistake. Haley told me to get out that Tina wasn't my kid and I had no say. Tina and I had a good relationship during those 3 years I grew to love her, but I was never her daddy. Tina missed you. I did my best not to cry when Trent said this. I'm certain my eyes were watering. Trent called over to the bartender and asked for a pen and piece of paper. I don't know where they ended up, but here's the name of the guy who replaced me, Barry Stewart. He was a carpenter employed by a builder in Plano, Chase Homes. He was working on the row of houses 1 block over from our place. I have no idea how he and Haley met. The first I knew anything was the day she had his truck packed and was leaving with him. I don't think I would have even known that, except I got a call from one of our neighbors wondering why Haley was putting stuff into the back of a truck. I came home just before they left. We were yelling at each other when the police showed up. That's the only reason I learned his name and where he worked. The police had no reason to hold them. They left. And I found a note in the kitchen basically saying goodbye. Our bank accounts were emptied. I spent a few thousand trying to find Haley but failed. 1 year later, I filed for divorce based on adultery and abandonment, sold the house and moved back here. You could see the pain in Trent's face as he told his story. He was still in love with Haley. Me? I just wanted to see my daughter. I thanked Trent for the information, bought him a drink, and walked out of the bar wondering what to do next. Trent spent thousands looking for Haley. Why would I waste my limited funds trying to do the same thing? There was one person who most likely knew where Haley and Tina were living, but that person was just as likely to keep me from knowing Haley's mother. This would be risky. Getting caught would mean going back to prison, but I couldn't think of an alternative. Margaret Turner was a woman who didn't change, a creature of habit. Margaret went to church every Sunday at 9 a.m. Margaret always left her spare house key in the fake rock next to the patio door. Why worry when Brutus, her pet Rottweiler, was there to guard the home? At 9:02, I was climbing over the fence from the alley behind her home. The key was there. I opened the patio door and heard Brutus growl. A growl that would frighten most anyone. Brutus came around the corner into the kitchen where I stood hoping. It may have been 6 years since Brutus last saw and smelled me, but the years didn't matter. Brutus stood up on his hind legs and licked my face. He remembered the man who picked him out at the pound, brought him to Margaret's home, trained him to sit and lie down, gave him treats every time I visited my mother-in-law. As Brutus remembered me, I reached over to the counter and grabbed a doggy treat out of the cookie jar Margaret kept there. I threw the treat on the floor and Brutus left me to eat it. I used the break to look around. Nothing in the kitchen had changed since the day John Turner had died 9 years ago. Except one thing had been added. There was a computer sitting on Margaret's desk for paying bills. I turned the computer on and the password screen appeared. I thought for a moment and typed John 3:16. The computer started to boot up. While the computer was booting, I looked through the drawers and found a few letters with return addresses on the envelopes. Haley was living in El Paso. I plugged my thumb drive into the USB port and copied Margaret's photo folder, video folder, and email folder. I had everything I came for and turned the computer off. I scratched Brutus behind the ears, locked the door, and put the key back. The rest of Sunday was spent watching videos and looking at photos of my daughter as she grew. Tina has grown up so much over these years. She's such a beautiful young girl. I was such a fool for missing those years. With the information from the letters and emails, I determined Haley and Tina were now using the Turner name. Haley was living with Barry Stewart, but wasn't married to him. Tina was in the 5th grade. On Monday, I gave the information and a $500 deposit to a PI down in El Paso, who confirmed the address and other information was still current. On Tuesday morning after work, I knocked on my parents' door. Although my mother visited me a few times in prison, I hadn't seen my father since the day I was sentenced. That day, he just looked at me with sadness and pain. Now he stood at the door. I wondered if he'd let me in. "Hi, Dad." Dad opened the door all the way and pulled me in the house. He looked directly into my eyes and then hugged me. "Mary, Charlie's home." Mom came into the room and hugged me. "Would you like some coffee?" "Yes, please." We sat at the same kitchen table where I ate my meals growing up. Margaret Turner wasn't the only person who liked routine. "Mom, Dad, first, let me apologize for letting you down. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your words of wisdom. I'm sorry I let a bunch of losers convince me to seek revenge." Mom came over and gave me another hug. Dad put his hand over my arm and squeezed. "I know where Haley and Tina are and want your help in reestablishing contact with Tina. I have a few thousand saved up to go down to El Paso and do whatever necessary to at least get visitation rights. Will you come down with me and help?" Dad answered first. "What do you plan to do?" "Nothing violent again, is it?" It hurt me. Because of my past actions, this is the first thing he asked. "No. My intention is to first consult an attorney down there. I served my time. I'm not on parole, so I can go down there and try to get a court order for visitation. But let's be real, I have a criminal record for assault. I think it might help if my parents went down with me and we three made the appeal." Dad looked over at Mom, and I could see the pleading in her eyes. She didn't have to say a word. Dad agreed. "When do we go?" "Can you be ready in a week? I need to give notice at work and take care of a few things. Can we take your car down there? We'll need transportation while we're down there." "Yeah, I'll take it into the shop tomorrow and make sure it's ready for a road trip. We'll leave next Monday, okay?" With that agreed, I had another cup of coffee and got caught up on family news. It felt good to be here again. I used my free time over the next few days to research the best family lawyers in the El Paso area. When I found one with excellent reviews, I called and made an appointment for the following Thursday. That would give us 3 full days of driving to get to El Paso. I hoped Dad and Mom were up to the journey. Dad was almost 70 and Mom 66. Dad's Lincoln Continental, it turns out dear old Mom is a big Matthew McConaughey fan, would be the perfect vehicle for a road trip. But when Dad found out about the Thursday appointment, we all agreed to leave Sunday and have an extra day to cover the 1,500 miles. That Sunday, here I was, a 36-year-old man, on a road trip with his mother and father. We headed out of town. It's all freeways now, but years ago, this was Route 66. Before we hit St. Louis, Dad told us how, when he was just 3 years old, his parents took this road on their way to Los Angeles. It was all 2-lane roads back then. A decent day's travel was 400 miles or less. It took the family 7 days to make it to Los Angeles. It seems my grandfather, a man who died before I was born, had a job waiting for him in California. One of his army buddies had a painting business. With all the new construction going up after the war, it was bound to be a gold mine. Unfortunately, said Dad, his mom, my grandmother, was homesick the entire year they lived in Pasadena. My grandfather packed up the family and drove back to Racine. It turned out best all round. My grandfather ended up the general manager of an aluminum plant. He was doing great until they found him slumped over his desk, dead from a heart attack at the age of 58. I was born a year later and named after him. During those 4 days in the car, Mom and Dad told more stories of the old days. Stories I either had forgotten or was too busy to listen when growing up. I moved out at 18. This was the longest we'd been together since our last vacation together when I was 14, and we went to Washington, D.C. Thursday afternoon, we were in Gladys Harper's law office. Unlike all my previous dealings with the law, this was a positive experience. I gave the attorney the unvarnished truth. My conviction, time in prison, how I had been denied any contact with Tina, how my parents were also denied contact, my divorce from Haley, her subsequent marriage and divorce from Trent. My attorney's eyes lit up when she heard Trent filed for adultery and abandonment. It didn't paint a great picture of me, but didn't make Haley out to be an angel either. Any reluctance the attorney had in taking our case melted away when my mother practically crumbled as she cried and told how she wasn't able to hold her granddaughter. I gave the attorney a deposit and she went to work on the filings. Now, all we could do was wait. We decided not to spend the weekend in El Paso, so we took another drive and headed into Big Bend National Park. Although our thoughts were on the events back in El Paso, it was an incredible weekend enjoying the sights in this quiet and stunning park on the Rio Grande River. 4 days later, I received a call from Ms. Harper's admin. We were to meet in her office Tuesday morning to prepare for a hearing Tuesday afternoon before a judge. Gladys Harper had been busy. She even had a signed statement from Trent Miller attesting to how Haley had left him and completely severed any relations between him and Tina. I later found out Trent did this on one condition: Tina was to be told Trent did not abandon her and that he loved her. We met again in the lobby of the courthouse and headed into a judge's chambers. I'm not naive. Within the first 10 minutes, it was apparent the judge and our attorney enjoyed a great working relationship. We answered the judge's questions, then Ms. Harper made it clear that at this time we were only seeking a preliminary meeting with Tina to re-establish contact and were more than willing to have a court-appointed social worker accompany us to the meeting. Ms. Harper said to the judge, given Ms. Turner's past actions, denying the clients any contact with Tina and later doing the same to Trent Miller, we request that Haley Turner not be given any prior knowledge of the meeting, since she would most likely use that time to delay the meeting and further poison Tina's mind against the clients. Here's where that working relationship and all the money we were paying Harper paid off. You could have knocked me over with a feather when the judge granted the request and set the meeting for the following afternoon. We were to pick up Tina at her school with the judge's order in hand and would be accompanied by Ms. Harper and a social worker. We'd be given 3 hours to take Tina out to a local cafe and talk with her, and then take Tina home. As I walked out of the courthouse into the warm Texas sunshine, I couldn't remember ever feeling as light and happy as I did that moment. It took all my willpower not to hug Ms. Harper right there. She said she was already working on the subsequent paperwork to establish visitation rights for me and my parents. We'll meet tomorrow at 1:45 in my office. The social worker will drive to the school with you. Once we have Tina, I'll be leaving you. The social worker will stay with you until you drop Tina off at her home. Do not do anything between now and tomorrow to mess this up. Stay sober, stay cool. No matter what is said or done, especially when Tina's mom overreacts, stay calm. We're counting on her to do or say something in front of the social worker which will only help us when we petition for visitation. Treat the social worker like she's your friend, because she can be when this goes back to court. The judge just handed us a precious gift. Treat it that way. With that said, she was gone. I hugged Mom and Dad and thanked them one more time for helping me. The next 22 hours dragged. We stayed close to the hotel and had a light meal in the diner across the street. A part of me expected something bad to happen. Would we show up at Tina's school tomorrow and find she wasn't there? My parents did their best to calm me down, but I could see the apprehension in their faces. We arrived at Gladys Harper's office at 1:30. 5 minutes later, a short, stout Hispanic woman walked into the office. Ms. Marie Hernandez introduced herself and spent a few minutes giving us the rundown on how she would observe but try not to be intrusive. She obviously read our attorney's motions because she was very kind to my mother, one grandmother to another. Mrs. Hernandez was also kind enough to give us some hints on how best to approach Tina after such a long and traumatic separation. Later, we were glad to have the advice given. I was racked with anxiety over how Tina would react to my appearance. We walked into the school's administration office 30 minutes before school let out. The principal and vice principal read the court order, called the district office, and talked to their legal office before agreeing to allow Tina to leave with us. Tina was removed from her class 10 minutes prior to dismissal bell and led into the office by the vice principal. The first person she saw was my mother. Tina's eyes lit up when she recognized her grandmother. Nana. Tina ran into her grandmother's arms as Mom bent down on one knee to accept and return the embrace, crying openly. Tina looked up when she saw my father walking toward them. Dad. Tina called out when Tina learned to talk. She couldn't get all of Granddad out and began to call him Dad. The name just stuck. We all thought it was cute. Dad picked Tina up and gave her a hug. Tina looked over at me, standing off to the side. "Daddy?" My appearance was so different from the last time we saw each other, the hesitation in her question was understandable. This was one of the hints Mrs. Hernandez gave us let Tina see her grandparents first, as they looked the same as they did 5 years ago, and grandparents always have that special connection. I dropped to my knees and held out my arms, saying a special prayer that my hug would be welcomed and returned. Tina ran into my arms. Our reunion was interrupted when the vice principal came into the office with Haley, who had been in the school parking lot waiting to pick Tina up. Haley took one look around the room and exploded. "What the heck is going on? What are you all doing here? Leave Tina alone." Ms. Harper stepped in with Mrs. Hernandez beside her. Ms. Harper handed Haley a copy of the court order. "Ms. Turner, this is a court order which allows Tina's father and grandparents a 3-hour visitation today. They will be escorted by Mrs. Hernandez of County Child Services to assure Tina's safety and their compliance with the order to return Tina to you within the 3 hours, starting immediately." Haley looked at the paperwork but didn't read it. She threw the papers back at Ms. Harper. "I don't care what these papers say. You can't just march in here and take my daughter." Haley pointed at my folks and me. "These people have no business here. She's my daughter." Haley grabbed for Tina and Tina hid behind my mom. The dynamics were not lost on Mrs. Hernandez, who stepped in front of Haley. "Ms. Turner," before another word came out, Haley screamed at her, using language disparaging of Mrs. Hernandez's background, physique, and where she could stick certain things. "Ms. Turner, would you like me to call the police? If so, keep this up and I guarantee you'll be in trouble until you can calm down and refrain from threatening people." At this point, the vice principal stepped in and did her best to calm Haley down. They walked into her office and we used the opportunity to escape with Tina and Mrs. Hernandez. The 4 of us sat in the little cafe a few blocks from the school. Mrs. Hernandez sat at a table close by. One of the other pieces of advice Mrs. Hernandez gave us was how to open the conversation with Tina after so many years apart. Again, we followed her advice and I believe it made a big difference. Tina didn't seem frightened by our presence, but my heart broke when my little girl had tears in her eyes and asked, "Daddy, how come you never called me or wrote? Why didn't I get a card on my birthdays?" Fortunately, I was ready for this. I pulled out a large, stuffed manila envelope out of Mom's purse. "Tina, I thought of you every day we were apart. Here are all the letters I sent, all the cards I sent. Every card and letter was returned to me. Your mother sent them all back. She didn't want me or your grandparents in your life. Twice I hired lawyers to make her let me talk to you." I showed Tina the envelopes, each one with Haley's handwritten scroll, "Return to sender." "But why would she do that, Daddy?" I wanted to answer, "Because your mother is mean." But I didn't. I held her hand and said, "You'll have to ask your mother that someday, but not today. Today, let's just talk together, you, me, and your grandparents. We all love you and want to know how you are doing in school, the names of your friends. Are you playing sports?" The 3 hours flew by. The 5 of us got into Dad's Lincoln and drove to Haley's home, getting there within the prescribed time. Haley was standing on their front porch smoking a cigarette, looking angry. I parked the car at the curb when Tina asked from the back seat, "I want to show you my room." I looked at Haley on the porch and replied, "I don't know if that's such a good idea today, Tina. It looks like your mom doesn't want us in your house. But it's my home and I should be able to invite people to my room." Tina looked so hurt that Mom said, "Why don't you show me your room today, Tina? On our next visit, maybe we can all see it." Tina agreed with this. Mrs. Hernandez said she'd need to be with them. Mom, Mrs. Hernandez and Tina stepped out of the back seat and walked up to the porch. Dad and I couldn't hear the words clearly, but the exchange was heated. As intimidating as Haley looked, Mrs. Hernandez was more so. After a few minutes, Mom, Mrs. Hernandez and Tina walked into the house. Haley stayed on the porch and glared at Dad and me. She even made an offensive gesture. To this day, I don't understand why Haley hates me so much. We were there for 10 minutes when 2 squad cars pulled up, one in front of our car and one behind. I admit, a moment of panic almost overwhelmed me. Did my hit on Ronald Young come to light? Did someone figure out it was me behind the fake internet fraud? I was so close to getting back together with my little girl, and then this. As 4 cops piled out of the 2 squad cars, Barry Stewart pulled into the drive and ran to the porch. Mrs. Hernandez met them all at the front door. Dad and I watched as the cops handcuffed Haley and Barry. What the heck was happening? I wanted to jump out of the car, but Dad held me back. I'll go and see Charlie. You stay here. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Before Dad could get out of the car, Mom came out of the house, walked quickly to the car, and got in the back. Barry and Haley were being placed into one of the squad cars by 2 of the cops. One cop from the 2nd squad car stayed on the porch. The other went into the house with Mrs. Hernandez. They returned with Tina. Mom, what the heck is going on? I don't know, Mrs. Hernandez was looking around Tina's room when she spotted a toy on her shelf. She picked it up and then asked Tina a couple questions that I couldn't quite hear. After Tina responded to the questions, Mrs. Hernandez took out her phone and called the police, told them to come with 2 squad cars and make it quick. That's all I know. Just then Mrs. Hernandez walked up to our car. I'm sorry, but Tina is going to come down to the station with me. We have to ask her some questions. Call Ms. Harper, have her meet us there. Tina will most likely stay with the social services family until this all gets sorted out. I had to ask, all what gets sorted out? What's going on? We don't know just yet. I don't think Tina has been harmed, but some suspicious things were found in her room and the police need to investigate. In the meantime, Tina will be safe with me. Please be patient. Please trust me, I only have Tina's well-being in mind. Call Mrs. Harper. It took 3 weeks, but in the end, we found out the entire story, and with Gladys Harper's skills, things turned out for us. When Mrs. Hernandez found the stuffed animal on Tina's shelf, she instantly recognized it as a remote camera. She said it was fortunate she recently attended a seminar on surveillance. A toy similar to the one found in Tina's room was used in the demonstration put on by Child Services as a camera used by bad people to spy on children. The question Mrs. Hernandez had asked Tina that afternoon was whether Barry ever accidentally entered her room while she was undressed. When Tina answered all the time, that's when Mrs. Hernandez called the police. The camera was enough to obtain a search warrant. Barry's computer was found. It contained over 100 images of Tina. There was also some additional 18-rated films Barry had purchased. Fortunately, there was nothing suggesting Tina had been harmed. Barry hadn't done much more than look before he was caught. Tina said he often had her sit on his lap, but so far hadn't touched her or had Tina touch him. Thank goodness. We did learn that Barry was a classic molester. He was grooming Tina for what was to come, most likely waiting for her first menstrual cycle. It turned out Haley didn't know about Barry's perversion or his spying. She did ignore Tina's complaints about Barry coming into her room and refused when Tina asked if she could have a lock on the door. When Ms. Harper filed our papers for custody of Tina, Haley's ranting at the police station in front of witnesses that the little brat was trying to seduce my boyfriend. Always walking around in shorts and t-shirts. Didn't help her case to prevent our motion. I also don't think it helped when Mrs. Hernandez repeated Haley's rant at the school when she called Mrs. Hernandez a chubby, unpleasant person that belongs back in Mexico. Judge Torres tried to look unfazed by the words, but it couldn't have helped Haley. Ms. Harper stacked the deck so high that Haley wasn't even given visitation rights. 2 months after we arrived in Texas, we were leaving in Dad's car with Tina strapped into her seat next to Mom. Tina and I moved into my folks' house. We had to put Tina in therapy for almost that entire first year. At the advice of the therapist, we even let Trent attend Tina's 11th birthday party. Forgiveness was part of the therapist's recommendation, which meant allowing Haley's mother limited access to Tina as well. These 2 things stuck in my mind, but after a half hour of conversation with Tina's therapist, I agreed it was for Tina's sake and just had to toughen up. The toughest part was when Haley moved back to town. We allowed Tina to visit her mother at her grandmother's house a few times before Mom received a call from Margaret Turner. I hate to do this, but I have to tell you. Haley is saying awful things about you, Charlie, and Hank. I just can't believe I raised such an awful person. It breaks my heart, but I don't want you keeping me away from my granddaughter. I don't think Haley should be with Tina anymore. That's all I needed to hear. Haley was cut off from Tina, and when she went to court, lost all rights to Tina. It was ugly, to say the least. Haley was swearing and threatened all of us, including Tina and Margaret, before being led out of the courtroom by her embarrassed attorney. Our family life was turning out to resemble a bad episode of a talk show. Haley refused to obey the judge's ruling and made a nuisance of herself, showing up at our door at odd hours, ignoring the restraining order we eventually served her with, banging on our door any time we didn't answer it. Even after she spent a weekend in jail, nothing changed. When the police proved to be a poor deterrent, I decided to resort to a different tactic. Once again, I was seated across from Juwan Price at a downtown diner. It's $1,000 to give her a warning. $2,000 gets physical, $10 it gets permanent. I don't want her hurt just gone. All right, we'll kindly ask her to leave town. Juwan accepted the envelope and left. I wasn't surprised to hear Haley return to Texas 2 weeks later. I was surprised a year later to learn she moved back in with Barry Stewart when he was paroled. The last I heard from Margaret is she and Barry are living down in Nicaragua after he skipped out on his parole. I ended up talking to Tina's therapist about Haley. She said it was impossible to diagnose in the third person, but given some of Haley's actions, it was most likely she was suffering from one or more mental disorders. I was just glad the woman was gone for the foreseeable future. During all this drama, it turned out I really had acquired a marketable skill while in prison. Dad fronted me with capital, and I was able to open a small storefront in a strip mall doing website design and personal computer repair. No regular business would hire a felon trusting him or her with so much information, but having my own business worked. Very few, if any, of my customers did a background check on me, and I played it straight, no funny business. I was making a decent income, which was enough to pay the rent on our apartment and meet Tina and my needs. It was 4 years later. Tina has been jogging and bicycling with me for the past 3 years. She's going to be a great middle distance runner. The varsity track coach has her eye on Tina. Tina will probably make varsity next year as a sophomore. Tina and I were spending a Saturday morning at the Crystal Lake Bike and Fun Run, a 25-mile bicycle course followed by a 10-kilometer run. We stayed together throughout the bicycle course for the last 2 miles. We were behind a woman who was pedaling fast, even with one prosthetic leg. Tina made a comment how courageous it must be to compete with such a handicap. Of course, the woman reminded me of Candy, but this woman had short, brown hair and the prosthetic was very different from Candy's. I never got more than a quick look at the side of her face as we passed her, but the memory of that night with Candy almost embarrassed me. After all, I was with my daughter. Not a great time to feel a bit awkward. We switched from biking to running, and 42 minutes later, as Tina and I approached the finish line, the woman passed and finished in front of us. Tina walked next to her as we were catching our breaths and introduced herself. The woman had her back to me and kindly accepted Tina's outstretched hand. That was awesome. Thank you. Tina continued to walk and talk. I held back, not wanting to interrupt. It's just like Tina to make a new friend everywhere she goes. Lately, she's been trying to get me to go out more often, and she'll start conversations with new people. After a few minutes, the two of them stopped and turned toward me. It was a face I could never forget. This my dad, Charlie Klein. Dad, this is Casey Sweeney. Candy, now Casey, looked at me without recognizing me at first, but there was something in her eyes that registered. Nice to meet you, Casey. I shook her hand. Dad, I told Casey we were stopping at that place on the river where you like to grab something to eat. Casey agreed to join us. I laughed. That would be great. We're heading to the Broken Oar. Do you know it? Casey now had time and remembered when and why we first met. Maybe I should let you two have some father-daughter time. Let me take a rain check. Casey, that's very nice of you, but we spend time together all week long. I think Tina would enjoy the company of another person of her own gender for a change. Please don't disappoint Tina or me. Come join us. Are you sure? I answered. Do I have to beg? If Dad doesn't, I will. Please come with us. Casey smiled. Okay, I'll meet you there. As Tina and I racked our bikes on top of the car, I said a little prayer that Casey wasn't lying and would meet us at the Broken Oar. She did show up, and for the next half hour, as I sat at the table eating a burger and drinking a soda, the two of them talked between bites as if they were old friends. Tina was exceptionally excited to learn Casey graduated from the Art Institute, majoring in photography. The Art Institute is Tina's favorite museum in Chicago, and art is her favorite school subject. I spent the time eavesdropping and learned Casey was working for a marketing company as a photographer of merchandise in online catalogs. Most of the small retailers that don't have their own in-house staff use an agency similar to Casey's employer to set up their website stores. Their conversation was interrupted by a young man who asked Tina if she would like to join him and his friends in a game of beanbag toss. Tina asked Casey and me if it was okay. Sure, it will give me a chance to talk to your dad. I agreed, and Tina took off with the young man. I followed her exit with my eyes, happy I could keep her in sight. You'll have your hands full. She's a beautiful young woman already. Yeah, but she has a good head on her shoulders. I trust her. Thanks for letting me join the two of you. I didn't know what to expect when you recognized me. I'm glad you did. I can't remember Tina latching on to someone as quickly as she has to you. I want you to know something. When I was in the business, I didn't respond to the men like I did with you. It was the way you handled that man at the bar, then how you treated me with respect that evening. Why didn't you ever call me again? I was hoping you would. I decided to tell her the truth. I had to work out my reunion with Tina first. And when that turned into me becoming a full-time single parent, I concentrated on our relationship and Tina's mental health. Second, I just got out of prison, and it would have been easy to fall for you, especially how pretty you were. And you didn't want to fall for that line of work. I didn't say that. Please don't put words in my mouth or think that. I'm sorry, do you still work as an escort? I decided to use the nicer phrase for Casey's occupation. Not since I graduated and got this job. I have a good income and health insurance. I quit the day I got hired. My medical bills are paid and I got my new leg. How about your folks? I seem to remember you were estranged from them. You have a good memory. Mom talks to me now. Dad still has a hard time dealing with the 18 months selling myself. He says he'd have rather mortgaged their house and emptied his $401,000, but I could never do that to them. It's been 3 years since my last job, and although it's taken a while, Dad seems to want to forget that awful time in our lives. Casey and I spent the rest of the hour talking about Tina and our jobs. When Tina came back to our table, it was time to leave. Can Casey come over for dinner next weekend? All I could think at that moment was how happy I am to have such a smart daughter. Dinner the following weekend began a series of dinners, then dates, then romance. Cassie and I have been dating for a little over a year. Now I'm considering asking her to marry me. Tina is all for it. She loves Casey, and they've become the best of friends. Before I ask Casey, I'm going to ask her father for his daughter's hand. I hope that helps in some small way to spur their too-slow reconciliation. Her father is like a lot of men. He wonders why Casey's past doesn't bother me. It probably would. But Casey and I had the discussion. We both agree that fidelity in marriage is non-negotiable. Some may say I'm a complete idiot for marrying a woman who once did that and allowing her in my daughter's life, but let me tell you a quick story. 2 years before that race day in Crystal Lake, I was dating a very nice woman and things were getting serious. One day she asked me how I lost my 2 front teeth. I decided to tell her the truth, including my relationship with Ron Young. Soon thereafter, she became unavailable for dates or any get-togethers. The message was clear. She couldn't stand to be with a man who did what I had to get through a prison sentence alive. After a few months dating Casey, when things started getting serious, we were now exclusive. I decided Casey should know the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Casey looked at me as I finished the story with her eyes watering. I guess sometimes we do things to survive that are contrary to who we believe we are. The thing to remember is this: you can't let it change you inside. You must forgive yourself and vow to be that person you once were. You've become Charlie Klein, loving father and all-around good guy. Again, if you need to forgive yourself for what happened in prison, start forgiving yourself today. I love you, Charlie Klein, and don't think you have anything to be ashamed of. Of course, Casey didn't say it as she wrapped her arms around me. She didn't need to say it. Sometimes forgiveness, if you're loving the right person, is all you really need to live well.